And really, before we start, while I have my big audience here, I just want to tell everyone that don't forget what holiday is coming up, but Purim, and you're going to want to go to the Purim spiel, Fiddler on Vermouth. It sounds good. It's going to be good. We have heavy appetizers. You're not going to want to miss that. And now, with no further ado, as I keep letting people in, a man who needs no introduction, and it's not Rabbi Zedek, but wait, I have to Rabbi Mafik, take it away.
Yes, it is wonderful to be here. I have been waiting for this day for a long time because I have been hearing about this book and encouraging this book and waiting for this book and looking forward to reading this book for a while. And it is a great honor to welcome Rabbi Michael Zedek to Macomb virtually, coming from Kansas City. Some of you may have met Rabbi Zedek in the past. He has been to Macomb before, and he was the longtime rabbi at Emmanuel in Chicago, and helped grow that congregation. There were a couple of rabbis in between, but he basically succeeded Rabbi Herman Schallman there, who I know some of you know. And before coming to Emmanuel, he was for many years the senior rabbi of the temple, B'nai Yehuda in Kansas City, which was one of the largest synagogues in the country. He was the senior rabbi there for, I think, almost 25 years. And then before coming to Emmanuel, he was the CEO of the Cincinnati Jewish Federation. And that's actually when we first met, because I was on a trip I was one of the students selected to go on a trip with the Cincinnati Jewish Federation to Israel. And, this was not an easy time in Israel. So I think my mom may have given Rabbi Zedek a few calls back then when he was, then we actually met when I was the assistant rabbi at Chicago Sinai in 2006. And we both were at a September 11th, 2006, 5-year anniversary of September 11th, and became wonderful friends, and has been a mentor and teacher ever since. And so it's just a great pleasure to welcome Rabbi Michael Zedek to talk about his book and anything else you'd want to ask the Rabbi. Miracles of the Ordinary, Rabbi Michael Zedek.
Thank you so much, Evan. And I must tell you all that, first of all, you have a wonderful rabbi, but I think you know that, so I'm not going to bother to elaborate on that one. But second, it's remarkably intriguing that Rabbi Moffick and I met in terms of the connection of heart that we share at an Episcopal church. So you never know what's going to happen vis-a-vis such circumstance. And then we would have our own little private high holiday sermon seminar from time to time. So any of the sermons you really enjoyed, they probably were mine.
Yeah. Don't listen too carefully to the stories, because you may hear them again sometime. Yeah.
So right now I am much too big. My screen, I'm going to go to gallery view. There we go. So Miracles of the Ordinary was the title that I originally had for what has become a book that I'll show you the cover one second. I think I didn't have anything to do with this cover, but the book publisher decided, isn't that pretty? Now, the only problem I have with it, I must admit to you, is that looks more like a burning tree than a burning bush, but so it goes. And we will be talking about that in greater detail as we get into this thing. That said, a couple of preliminaries. One, if I say something that's not clear, doesn't make sense to you, what the heck are you talking about? Well, I may find myself very interesting if I'm not conveying my intent in a fashion that you can capture. I need you to push back, because let's put it this way. One of the most exquisite things about the Jewish tradition is the best word we have for disagreement, argument, is a machloket. And you may know it comes from the Hebrew word chelek, which means a portion or a piece. which is to say, what a wonderful notion of what a debate means. I don't know it all. You don't know it all. We have pieces. And if we can somehow find a way to compromise those, find their overlap, we might even know more. So with that in mind, I want to start with a story. This story comes from Buddhist tradition, and it concerns a guru who took it upon himself to believe that he needed somehow to gain the Buddha's attention. Now, I don't want to ruin a good story with the obvious question, why in the world would someone who is understood to be a guru need anybody's attention? But this is just a good story and we're going to use it anyway. So the guru determined that the way he would gain the attention he sought is if somehow he could learn how to walk on water. He spent 20 years in intense meditation and mindfulness practice, and lo and behold, after 20 years, he succeeded. He walked on water. He showed the Buddha, whose immediate response was, "Why? I don't understand. Why didn't you simply pay 2 rupees and take the ferry?" Now, what's important about that story is illustrated in a story that comes from West Virginia many centuries later. A hunter, something with which I'm not acquainted, has a new dog that he's excited to take out for its first trial hunt. He goes to his favorite duck pond with the dog. He shoots a duck, instructs the dog to go fetch the duck, and the dog does something extraordinary. Rather than swimming out, it walks on the water. The man is so nonplussed by this experience that he packs up his truck, takes back into town with the dog, but curiosity gets the better of him. The next day, invites a friend to go with him. Dog, same thing. Shoot a duck, walks out, brings it back, shoots out, walks it back. Neither of them says anything until finally the owner of the dog can't restrain himself any longer. And he says, "You notice anything peculiar about my dog?" And the guy says, "Yeah, kind of think of it. The dog thing doesn't know how to swim." Now, the reason why that might be ever so slightly instructive is because, as it happens, every single time in the Hebrew Bible, there's no exception to this, every single time in the Hebrew Bible, what you and I might label as a miracle, no one draws the correct lesson. And with that, I'm going to try to elaborate as we go on. What the heck do I mean and what's going on? For instance, some of you are old enough, sad to say, to remember Mr. Ed, the golden age of situation comedies on TV. And Mr. Ed was a talking horse. And when Mr. Ed introduces himself to Wilbur, those are one of the few imitations I do. I think that was pretty good. Alan Young, who plays the owner, is properly nonplussed. Because after all, it is not our experience for horses to talk, let alone have the best lines in classic situation comedies. Yet the Bible has an exact parallel. Balaam, a quote unquote pagan prophet, has a conversation with his, I'll be polite, donkey, the text says ass. And he acts as though it's a perfectly normal thing to have such a conversation, but much deeper. The text says it takes 10 plagues to get the children of Israel out of Egypt, right? Although it's not anything less than provocative, that rabbinic tradition says it takes thousands of plagues, which is the rabbi's way of saying, watch out, something funny is going on here. Text says 10 plagues. Wouldn't one have been enough for you or me to say, this is not going to work out well. I think I better cut my losses here. But 10, the children of Israel march out into the desert on their way to the promised land, and Yul changes his mind. That's for those of us who are fans of that hideous movie, 10 Commandments. Yul plays Pharaoh, and he goes after them. Now, among the many problems, one, no firstborn in the military, no firstborn horses for the chariots, because those have all been killed according to the story, and emphasize the word story. So, the chariots, ancient equivalent tanks, come after them. The Israelites are at Yam Suf. By the way, it's not the Red Sea. Yam Suf means the...
No, it's just crazy, Jacob.
Okay, well, this...
A miracle. By the way, the Talmud refers to a bat kol as the way in which God somehow is heard in the world. A bat kol literally means a daughter of a voice. Once removed from the hearing is when we sit still and perhaps recognize the wonder that is all around us and in us. Back on point. So what does the text tell us the Israelites do when Edward G. Robinson sees the dust cloud of the Egyptian chariots coming to get them? He screams at Moses a refrain that they'll echo over and over again. Why'd you bring us out here to die? Weren't there enough graves in Egypt? Why don't they simply say, look at these stupid Egyptians. We've got somebody even better than Patrick Mahomes playing for our team. We got God. And these idiots don't recognize it? But the text says they panic. They turn to Moses with that refrain, why'd you bring us out here to die? And the text says, Moses says, be still and hear the workings of the Lord. I'm quoting, in English at least. Then the text says, notice I didn't say anything other than the text says. I don't know what God does or doesn't do. The text says, Moses turns to God, and the text puts in God's mouth, why do you cry out to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward, which may be the most remarkable moment of miraculous in the entire story, that they go forward. All right. As you know, the sea splits and they walk through on dry ground. Now, every single time what you or I would say is miracle, there's always a telltale, there's a watch out. Sea splits, they walk through on dry ground. Shouldn't there be mud? Of course, but the text is playing a remarkable multi-level game of meaning with us. The Israelites march through, and a whirlwind, a cloud keeps the Egyptian chariots at bay. They get on the other side, the cloud, the whirlwind, the cloud, whatever it is, disappears, and you're an Egyptian chariot driver. You're going to drive in there? You got to be out of your freaking mind. But the text says they do. And then, Hebrew is absolutely unambiguous about this. Then the children of Israel beheld Mitzrayim. For those of you who know a little bit of Hebrew, Mitzrayim means Egypt. Mitzrayim would be Egyptians. Mitzrayim dead on the shore of the sea. But here's the best part. Then they had emunah, often mistranslated as faith. It means confidence. They had confidence in Moses, in God, and in Moses, God's servant. That is until the next chapter. Why did you bring us out here to die? We've got no water. And those of you familiar, Moses splits the rock, they get water. By the way, that's a quote unquote miracle I've done. I've camped in the Sinai for a week. The Sinai consists of three principal geological formations: sandstone, limestone, and granite. Limestone, if you're familiar, when water drips on it, hollows out and contains the water. That's how we get limestone caves, stalactites and stalagmites and all that kind of stuff. At any rate, the pattern is the point. They've got water, everything's fine. We've got nothing to eat. Why did you bring us out here to die? In Egypt, we had leeks and onions and garlic. I'm quoting. This is unbelievable. It's amazing. So what do? They are greeted with a remarkable food that they call manna. And the text says they called it manna because, archaic Hebrew, they looked at it and said manhu. Now watch out, folks. Manhu is archaic Hebrew for, what is it? It's the Bible's attempt, I think, at a certain moment of humor. Mystery meat, SOS, for those of you who are familiar with some of the less fine culinary experiences of life. By the way, there are efforts to try to suggest what manna might have been. Some suggest the oozings of a tamarisk tree, which grows in the Sinai and is a source of protein. Or, I hope you haven't had breakfast very recently, some suggest it's bird droppings, which there are tribes in Peru, native groups, for whom that's the principal source of protein. And as it happens, because another miracle is going to occur that we need to watch out for. As it happens, the Sinai is one of the world's great bird flyways, and those birds are on their annual migrations over the Mediterranean. There are no rest stops. They plop down and they literally don't move until they regain their strength, because they're on their way to further parts of Africa. That's significant because they get sick and tired of manna, and we want meat. Next day, the camp is surrounded by birds, or as I like to say, since I'm from Brooklyn, boids. So, thank you for smiling, Vanessa. What goes on next is even more significant. Everything's fine. They get to Mount Sinai, wherever that may be. And in the single greatest personal appearance in all of human history, God is experienced by the entire nation. Now, as that happens, that's unparalleled. It's unprecedented. Every other so-called theophany, that's a fancy schmancy religious argot for God experiences, is either one person or maybe three persons. Some of you are familiar with the so-called miracle of Fatima, where these three young people experience the Virgin Mary. But the entire nation, absolutely unprecedented. Moses goes up on top of the mountain, and what do? They build a golden calf. Either these are the dumbest people to ever walk the face of the earth, or there's something more going on here than meets the eye. Now, obviously, as a rabbi, I subscribe to the notion that there's depth and meaning and importance, not just in ancient times, but for us in these texts. So what could it be? One possibility. Martin Luther King Jr.'s favorite understanding of these stories was that these stories demonstrate that it is easier to get the slaves out of Egypt than it is to get Egypt out of the slaves. Ladies and gentlemen, that's always true. Whether it's a movement of personal liberation for that which might, quote unquote, enslave us, or a national movement for a people or a nation to embrace the opportunity to be in charge of their own lives. We are free before we are prepared to embrace it. I also subscribe, and the book focuses on another prospect. People are free to disbelieve the evidence of their own experience. I'll repeat it because it's an upside down. People are free to disbelieve the evidence of their own experience. I know that's true because it's true about me. And the leap, of course, is that I believe it's true, at least sometimes, for everyone. The old prayer book used to put it this way: days pass, years vanish, and we walk sightless among miracles. Put another way, one of the remarkable pieces of the puzzle here is that I know you're going to be surprised, I think. Pretend to be surprised if you're not. The Hebrew Bible, biblical Hebrew, does not have a word that translates with what we mean by the word miracle. Because if I were to ask you for a definition, you would say some supernatural intervention into the regular routine of experience. Now, we have in the Hebrew Bible words that are translated as miracle, but they don't mean that. The three most popular are nes, like al ha-nisim al ha-purkan, nes gadol haya sham, Hanukkah, a great miracle happened there if you're not in Israel. A great miracle happened here. But nes literally means a sign or a flag. A sign, a symbol, something that points to something beyond itself. That's what a symbol is. The next word is ot, which is literally the Hebrew word for a letter. But a letter is simply a symbol that we've all agreed stands for something else. And my favorite word is pele, which means a wow or a wonder, but is regularly translated as miracle. In short, we do not have a word for that. All of those words mean a sign or a symbol that points to something deeper, something more. What does it point to, perhaps? And I would suggest that among the prospects is that behind everything is the infinite, the one. Everything points to the source of all, or to use the traditional Western word, God. Miracles as discrete, specific interventions are an illusion, ones that blind us to the allusion, namely that behind everything, there is only and always the one. Willa Cather, for those who remember Death Comes for the Archbishop, a wonderful book. I truly recommend it to you if you're unfamiliar. She writes this: miracles seem to me to rest not so much upon faces or voices or healing power coming suddenly near to us from afar off, but upon our perceptions being made finer, so that for a moment our eyes can see and our ears can hear what is there about us always. Einstein, one of the great theologians of the 20th century, in addition to being a pretty fair country scientist, put it this way: there are two ways to live. The first is as though nothing is a miracle. The second is as though everything is a miracle. I honestly believe it is possible for us to get closer to the second way, closer. So less fancy. Some of you may know the name Isaac Bashevis Singer, wonderful author, Nobel Prize winner for literature, wrote in Yiddish, and then when he came to the United States in English. But that aside, in an interview he gave right before his death, he wrote the following: the second half of the 20th century is a complete flop. The poor want to be rich, the rich wish to be happy, the single want to be married, and the married want to be dead. Boy, that's not a nice thing to say before Valentine's Day, is it? But he turned more seriously. He had a sardonic sense of humor. For me, everything is still mysterious, even the most natural things. When I throw a stone and it falls back to earth, I know that is gravity. But isn't that a great mystery? Just because you have seen a thing 10 times, should it stop being mysterious? A writer gave me once a story about a man with a chopped off head who could still talk. I said to him, isn't it marvelous enough that a man with a head can talk? So let's talk, because the principal challenge to what I'm suggesting is Moses and the burning bush. After all, what would you say if Rabbi Moffat came in on a Friday night and said, you know, before services, I was in the parking lot and there was this bush and it was on fire, but it wasn't burning up. And not only that, ladies and gentlemen, it talked to me. What would you say?
I might say some other congregations are now looking for a rabbi.
Well, that might be one option. Clearly, we would suggest this person is in need of some assistance, medical intervention. But unfortunately, in our society, it's equally likely that we would put the individual on television, where we would send gobs of money to him or her in exchange for that person praying for us. But here's the awkwardness. How would you know a bush is burning and not burning up? You'd have to, as the text says, turn aside and pay attention, which is to say, maybe what the text is trying to tell us is Moses and you and I aren't, because Moses has, what shall we say, a more cultivated attention span. He can stay in there, pay attention. Second, I really don't think bushes talk. Not Hebrew, English, or any other language, not even Latin, for goodness gracious sake. But I do think one can hear oneself addressed in a sunset, in a tear, and an embrace, in an experience that changes our lives, which is what clearly happens to Moses. Here he is, safe in the Sinai suburbs, maybe even Highland Park, married to the boss's daughter. He's going to inherit the family business. He has a 3-chariot garage. And what does he do? He throws it all away to go back into the fiery furnace, which is what the Hebrew Bible calls Egypt, to try to free a people, his people, who aren't even going to be grateful. What happened? Just a suggestion for a naturalist explanation as opposed to a supernatural intervention. According to the story, it's near the end of the day in the desert. A pristine, unpolluted world, which is not something that with which we're familiar. But can you imagine what the sunset looked like? The sky would be as though it were on fire. What kind of bush was it? We have no question about what. It was a bramble with thorns and small leaves. Thorns in order to minimize what it loses to the animals that need it to survive. Small leaves in order to minimize the evaporation so it can survive. Moses sees this sight and he hears himself addressed. I cannot be safe while my people are burning in the fiery furnace of Egypt, but not yet reduced to a fine ash, a bush that burns but is not yet consumed. This is unquestionably in my mind why almost every Holocaust memorial has a burning bush symbol involved in it, because it's a symbol for the Jewish people, wounded brutally in history, but not consumed, not finished. There's a wonderful midrash, it's one of my favorite. It suggests not a single blade of grass can grow unless the angel for that particular blade of grass whispers to it, grow, grow, grow. Now, I don't think there's an angel for every blade of grass, but I have had moments where life has that coherence and clarity such that, to use biblical language, the ground upon which I walk is holy. Or as Elizabeth Barrett Browning put it, earth's crammed with heaven, and every bush is afire with God. But only he who sees takes off his shoes, while others sit round and pluck blackberries. Now, if I could have a discussion with her, first of all, that she wrote that from a wheelchair is not without consequence, importance. Second, she was trying to point out that when it's just a blackberry bush, it is a burning bush. Meaning, all of us in some fashion are dualists. I mean by that, we divide the world into ordinary and extraordinary. What do we do with the extraordinary? That's quite clear. We pay attention. It slaps us across the face and says, pay attention to me. We can't help ourselves. We cannot ignore it. And what do we do with the ordinary? That's equally clear. We take it for granted. So if it were possible to take the ordinary for granted less, our lives would be more filled with life. So here's another old bromide from Gates of Prayer. Oh, give thanks that spring will always come to make the heart leap, that your winter ear remembers a summer song, and autumn colors return to the jaded eye. Oh, make song for lucid air of morning, bright bloods beating, life's flow deep and swift, a kingdom of joy and awe for us to dwell in. Final stanza. Oh, be glad for eye and tongue to see and taste the common of our days. So we're all dualists, I'm suggesting. Let me give you a deeper reflection. In Jewish tradition, I'll go Talmud for a second. There's a Talmudic suggestion that one may not go more than 6 cubits, that's what, about 8 feet, without pausing to give praise to the source of life, God. I would suggest, how can you take so long between praises? But if we, hi, thank you, hi, thank you, hi, we never get through the walk. But it's instructive that there is never a moment where if we were just to pay attention, we would know we are at a burning bush moment. For instance, I'm going to skip the for instance for the sake of time. Here's my cliche about this. The aha is incredible, but everybody knows the aha is incredible. Judaism's genius, and I do mean Judaism's genius, is to cultivate an awareness that the ho-hum is really aha. For example, in rabbinical school, Rabbi Moffick and I, among the things we learned first was the Siddur, the order for prayers. And one of the first prayers in the morning is euphemistically called the plumber's prayer. In a very cleaned up translation, it goes like this. Praise to you, eternal our God, ruler of the universe, who has fashioned us in wondrous manner, with openings and closings. And if that which were to be open were to be closed, and if that which were to be closed were to be open, we could not stand before you. And then the Khatimah, the seal, praise to you, eternal our God. And this is almost close to impossible to translate. Mafli la'asot. Mafli is the verb form of Pella, who wows to do, who miracles to do, who does. Now, that's a prayer about urination and defecation, which is to say, even the base acts of our body are moments to be aware. But what do we normally? We only pay attention to those things when they're not working, right? But it wouldn't be a bad thing. Another midrash. To children born in the wilderness, when they entered the promised land and they learned that you put a seed in the ground, You water it, you cultivate it, it grows, you harvest it, then you mill it and you get bread was nothing short of miraculous. It turns it upside down because they were used to quote unquote manna, but they recognize that the activity of growing stuff is absolutely the key to living a life filled with meaning and purpose and joy. So every great religious tradition talks about this. So here's one. Woe to the person who stands on earth and does not see what he sees. I love that phrase. Woe to the person who stands on earth and does not see what he sees. We're talking about intention, or to use the cliche of many spiritual traditions, mindfulness. For example, you may be aware that in Jewish tradition, anytime there's a quote unquote redundant word or unnecessary word, the sages play with it as though it might be a key to deeper levels of meaning and understanding. For example, Moses is instructed, go up to the top of the mountain and be there. Now, wait a second. If he goes up to the top of the mountain, where else would he be? But we all know the experience of maybe even at the moment, we're here, but we're not yet here. We're worried about brunch. We're worried about the Super Bowl. We're worried about what happened yesterday. We're worried about the appointment we have on Monday. Why not just be present in the moment we are in? There'll be more than enough time to reflect on it later, but our lives would be more enthusiastically filled with wow if we could just be here now. True story. Some of us, again, old enough to remember Professor Leo Buscaglia, used to be a fixture of PBS fundraisers. He called himself the Professor of Love. And he was so filled with enthusiasm, it was almost as though his skin could not contain him. He tells a story about himself. He's on a trip to Japan, and he's being escorted through one of the most important Zen gardens by a master of the Zen tradition. Buscaglia, of course, said, oh, look at that. Oh, my goodness. Look, oh, that's so beautiful. I'm just overwhelmed. The master of Zen tradition says nothing until finally he turns around, slaps Buscaglia across the face and says, would you please stop walking with your dirty feet in my mind? In short, there's more than enough time to be present to the moment. So what gets in the way? How get some of that mindfulness? There's so many things that do get in the way. And in the interest of time, I'm going to just foreshorten a bunch of them. One of them is we are so busy with the stuff of making a living that we often forget the equally vital task of making a life. There was a New Yorker cartoon of some years back which shows two people at the beach. They're presumably, since the New Yorker, at the Hamptons, and they're enjoying their adult beverages. And one says to the other, this is so perfect, I could stay like this for the next 5 seconds. We just can't let go of the making a living piece and don't give enough attention to the making a life piece. Deeper, we're addicted to the quick fix. I mean, after all, I did 20 minutes of ab work. How come I don't have a six-pack? I meditated one day. How come I haven't achieved enlightenment? Or as Jim Morrison put it, we want the world and we want it now. Or even better, Carrie Fisher, instant gratification isn't quick enough. But a much deeper level of concern is we are conflicted in ourselves. We are, well, Groucho Marx put it this way, I wouldn't want to be a member of a club that would have me as a member. I suggest the following. I am much more than I ever thought I would be, and much less than I should be, and both statements are true. Wisdom is if I can accept the notion that both of those statements are true. All too often, I only listen to one voice. I sometimes consider there's the devil and the angel in the old cartoons, eat the cake, don't eat the cake. And the devil is almost much more attractive. And almost in every cartoon, they eat the cake. But let me be concrete. I was a wonderful father. You would have wanted to be my kid. I mean, wow, what a daddy I was. But if all I heard was I was a wonderful father, my children would have never learned how to ride a bicycle. For how could I let them risk hurting themselves, skimming their knee? That's not okay. Perfect fathers would make a perfect world, protect them at all costs. Additionally, I was totally incompetent as a parent. I mean, who is qualified to be a parent, for goodness gracious sake? And if all I heard was the voice that says you don't know what you're doing, I would be dangerous. Either dangerous to them, because I happen to think that's a major source of child abuse, or dangerous to myself, anger turned inward, which is the classic definition of depression. Both statements are true. I am much more and less than. Now, the curious paradox, to quote a wonderful psychologist of years past, Dr. Carl Rogers, University of Wisconsin, Vanessa, I'm sorry. Vanessa is a Michigan alum. It is a curious paradox that when we accept ourselves as we are, then we can change. The challenge, of course, is to accept ourselves as we are. But the deeper question, seems to me, is why bother? And for the Bible, the answer is so that your days will be long upon the earth. Notice it doesn't say that you'll get a long life, that you'll have more years. It says essentially it says whatever portion is yours or mine will be more filled with a fullness of the experience of this brief gift before eternity if we live with a certain intentionality, or again, to use the cliche, mindfulness. The 24-hourness will be rich. Now, reminds me of the toast, may you live all the years of your life. Nobody, I think, gets all of that, but we could get more of it. And I learned this lesson from my father, with your indulgence. My father, he died when I was 18. A single most important experience that shaped the adult I hope to become someday. My father knew he was going to die, cancer, and he set out for me to learn what I consider the most vital lessons I know. Instead of drawing the obvious conclusion, life sucks, it can't be trusted, what's the point of loving someone? All you're going to do is lose them. These 4 lessons. Lesson number 1, life is a very precious and very fragile gift. Needs no elaboration, self-evident. Lesson number 2, were I to die today, I want more. I am so freaking intoxicated with the gift of life that, to quote Edna St. Vincent Millay, oh life, I cannot hold you close enough. Lesson number 3, and I mean this with every fiber of my being. Were I to die today, it would be enough to say the gift of life was worth it. I want more, but if this is all I get, Dayenu, thank you. Lesson number 4, I'd rather have my father than have learned any of this. I can't have my father, but I can have what his life still means in me. So some of you know the name Annie Dillard, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, etc. She suggests the following. If you really pay attention, life is like holding a wine glass under a waterfall. And one of the things I'm suggesting is, can we be among those upon whom less of that vintage is lost? Or to quote Henry James, but among the reasons why this stuff is filled with a lot of literary references, pre-order the book on Amazon, is that's as though I were on the Tonight Show plugging, right? That before I became a rabbi, I briefly taught English and writing at Syracuse University. Don't ask me why, I'll tell you some other time, but it was a telling experience. Henry James, be among those upon whom nothing is lost. But I happen to think that's part of the problem. We are all or nothingness. If I can't have it all, I'm just going to put it on the sidelines and not worry about it because I can't get there. But we could be among those upon whom less is lost. That is part of the Jewish métier. Among those upon whom less is lost. So here's a couple of suggestions how we might get there. This is a true story. I learned it from a friend of mine who goes to a spirituality and retreat center where I've been privileged to teach for a number of years now. It's called Rancho La Puerta. Anybody on this ever been there? Rancho La Puerta, it's in Tecate, Mexico. It happened to be in Tecate, Mexico, because one of the co-founders was a Jewish refugee from Romania or Hungary, never was ever quite sure. He couldn't get into the United States during World War II because we were not especially accommodating. Sounds almost like the present day adventure of illegal immigration, doesn't it? Tecate, Mexico was as close as you could get. So at that spirituality retreat center, one of my friends was part of the fitness staff. She and her mother were imprisoned in a Japanese prisoner of war camp in Indonesia during World War II. 80% of the people with whom she was imprisoned did not survive. They died of starvation. Her mother and she were exceptions. Her mother lived into her late 90s, and the daughter always marveled at the exquisite enthusiasm, the joy for life that her mother evidenced. Because after all, as we all know, many people have emerged from such frightening experiences with a cynicism and despair on display at all times and at the ready. She asked her mother, how explain it? And her mother suggested a formula, which I've elaborated on. And here's her formula with my elaboration. Her mother said, every day of my imprisonment and every day thereafter, I would try to do three things: to see something beautiful, to hear something beautiful, and to say something beautiful. And I've added, since we're Jews, to do something beautiful. And every night before I go to sleep, I undertake what's called a cheshbon hanefesh, an inventory of my soul, of my day. And I ask myself, did I see something beautiful? Did I hear something beautiful? Did I say something beautiful? And did I do something beautiful? And if the answer to any one of those questions is no, I'm not ready for bed. I have to get up because I still have my soul work for that day to do. I urge you to consider it because it will make it more and more readily able to see, hear, say, and do the beautiful, and make the embrace of life filled with enthusiasm. That's the right word, by the way, because enthusiasm comes from the Greek. It means to be filled with God, enthusiasmos. The Hebrew word is even better. The Hebrew word that's translated as enthusiasm is hit la'avut. It literally means to be on fire. Maybe you could be a burning bush for somebody else, to be on fire. So one other formula. Many years ago, my first year in the rabbinate, I was in Kansas City, and I would study once a week with a wonderful retired rabbi who was sightless. And he and I would read Midrash together, which was a shared passion. And after we would study the Midrash, he would then really do the teaching. He said to me one day, Michael, when do you say the Shehechianu prayer? And for those of you know the answer is when you're doing something for the first time or the first time in season. First time, but you've never done it before, you've never had it before, you've never done this experience, you could add the Shehechianu for whatever you're doing. If it's in a day in which fruit would be unique to season, in addition to the prayer for fruit, you could add a Shehechianu, or more clearly, the first night of Hanukkah, in addition to the two prayers, you do the Shehechianu, but not the second night because it's not the first time in season. I gave him that answer. He said, wrong. He said, what do you mean? What are you talking wrong? I just got out of seminary. I know more than I'm ever going to know before. And you're telling me I'm wrong? And then he used the Talmudic phrase, which translates, let your ears hear what your mouth has spoken. When you're doing something the first time or the first time in season. First time or first time in season. And he said to me, Michael, this transformed my life. When are you not doing something for the first time? And ever since, right back here, he was a very small man in terms of stature. There's a voice, his voice saying, and that is to say, I can't get through one before it's time for the next one and the next one and the next one. Now, I'll admit, it's often just background noise. But then there are moments when there's breakthrough, and the ground upon which I walk is, yes, indeed, holy, holy, holy. So, poets, of course, have always known this stuff. It's just that the poetry only works when we hear what is inchoate in us and it comes out for us. A quickie before a poem. Some of you know the name John Burroughs, one of the founders of the Sierra Club, somewhat controversial now because of his racist views. But he once said, if you want to see something different, take the same walk you took yesterday. Well, I got news for you, folks. You don't have to wait that long. The walk is changing as you are changing while you're on the walk. The challenge is just to be present, to pay attention, to be there. So, one story and one poem, and then it's open season for questions, comments, alternative speeches. There's a story that's told about Robert Frost, who's being interviewed by a graduate student who's doing her PhD on him. They're having dinner at his cottage in Vermont. Now, this may be apocryphal because I have no idea whether Frost had a cottage and was having dinner with this student, but it's a great story. Why ruin it by finding out if it's true or not? It's sunset. The graduate student says, "Oh, Dr. Frost, look at how beautiful that is." And he says, "Listen, I make it a point never to talk about business while I'm eating." I agree. I think that's an exquisite story. But here's a deeper level. Some of you know the poet Mary Oliver. If you're not familiar with her, I urge you to do so. One of her shortest poems, Formula for Living. Pay attention, notice, tell it. But here's some of the, I recommend the poem. I'm not only going to read a part of this person, it's called When Death Comes. The last lines. When it's over, I want to say, all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. I was a bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. So let's not be visitors. Let's be embracers of the fullness of the experience for the brief moment that we have it. And with that, I'll pause and suggest I've probably got maybe a couple of hundred more pages to worry about. But thank you for the chance to share some of this with you. And thank you for what's to come. And let us be among those upon whom less is lost.
I think your words were really beautiful, and I'm opening it now for questions. I'll put the link again for your book in the chat.
Okay.
This is at Amazon. You can go. They'll just show you what the book is. You can go to your.
These are pre-orders. It's not coming out till September.
Oh, okay. So do you have to put your pre-orders in? But if anyone has a question,
Comment.
and of course, if nobody does, I do. Is this your first book?
It's my first book as opposed to article. Yeah.
Okay. And how did first of all, when you said that you were an English teacher at Syracuse, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Just, your all the quotes and the way you take it apart. I can only imagine what you're like in a book group. Great. I'm sure you're great in a book group, but I have one question here. It is said that Moses was a magician. What role does magic play in all of this? Great question, Phil Rosen.
It's a wonderful question. In Jewish tradition, he's not a magician. The Egyptians had quote unquote magicians who theoretically, according to the text, were able to reproduce some of the experiences of the so-called plagues. But what the biblical tradition about magic is that it doesn't work, even if it works, because it's a manipulating of the universe to go off course, as opposed to a recognition of the source of the universe with which we are supposed to engage. And I would argue that, well, I'm going to put it in, I know you're going to be surprised. I'm going to put it in a story form. One of the most wonderful Christian colleagues I ever had the experience of knowing was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Fred Craddock, universally recognized in his denomination, Disciples of Christ, as one of the greatest pulpit presences there is or was. Was now, since he is deceased. He tells a story about his first trip to Israel. And in that trip, the guide, how many of you have been to Israel? Lots? So I'm sure you think you had the best guide ever, right? Everybody thinks their guide was the best guide ever. And that's in part because the course to become a licensed guide is one of the most difficult imaginable in Israel. And you had a good guide, I have no doubt about that. But his guide said, such and such a miracle happened here. And Craddock immediately said, I hope you don't mind if I have a different understanding. And without missing a beat, the guide responded, of course not. You can be sure If there's only one way to understand something, it didn't come from God. And for that, people could easily, and I'm not trying to disabuse you of, take these texts literally. I just think that's missing the meanings, the deep truths, not facts, truths that are in these stories. Because this is not just, it isn't a history book. I mean, for example, rabbinic traditions has, I'll show off my Hebrew, literally, there is no early or late in sacred literature, which means this is not a history book. It's a spiritual autobiography. Stories are important, not because they happened, but because they happen in us, in all persons, make this journey. An easy example. There's no holiday in the Hebrew Bible for getting in the promised land, because all of us ultimately wander in the wilderness. Can we give thanks even as we wander in the wilderness of Highland Park or Sinai or Kansas City, Missouri? Somebody put another question.
Oh, yeah, I'll read it. Jesus is well known as a miracle worker, and he did about 50 miracles. Who's counting? Okay, all of these miracles are paralleled by Elijah, Elisha, and various rabbis in rabbinic literature. Can you comment on this?
Yes, I can.
Good answer.
You want me to? Well, I can comment.
Yeah.
Okay. As it happens, my current gig is I'm the rabbi in residence at St. Paul's School of Theology, which is United Methodist Seminary. So I'm not unfamiliar with the New Testament, which can be understood quite literally as a midrash on the Hebrew Bible. Among the things that you must understand, and many non-literalist, fundamentalist Christians understand, is that what we call the New Testament, with the exception of some of the letters of Paul, none of them are eyewitness accounts. Paul is the first writer of the circle around Jesus who never met Jesus until he was dead, which gave him much more leeway to innovate than the so-called 12, assuming there were 12, down to 11 because of the Judas betrayal, so-called. Interesting. Judas. I wonder where that came from. Judas. So the Gospels are at minimum 70 years after Jesus. You think they had eyewitness accounts? CNN wasn't around. They had a tradition. And what is that tradition? Well, among other things, the Messiah, which, by the way, in Jewish tradition is not Savior, salvation, key to eternal life, which is what Paul changes it into, will ride into Jerusalem on an ass, a young ass. So in one of the gospel accounts, Jesus is riding into Jerusalem as though he were a rodeo rider with one foot on one donkey and one, which is ridiculous. It's just biblical. But the writer didn't know that. The writer wasn't there. The writer comes up with, Jesus must have done this because it says the Messiah will do this. By the way, among the critical things about Jewish Messiah notions is that you will know it's Mashiach Zeit, that's fancy schmancy for Messianic time, because there'll be a fundamental way in which the world works. That hasn't occurred, which is why Christianity has the notion of a second coming, because whatever Messiah is supposed to do, Jesus didn't finish the job. I love the notion that Christianity is a way in which non-Jews come to have an experience of the God of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac, et cetera, et cetera. But these stories are constructs based on, since I already believe he's the Messiah, he must have done these things. Now, one small footnote, all healing, I shouldn't say all, 80% of healing is faith healing. It's confidence in the healer that gets us well, and or even if we do nothing, we'll often get well because the body has a remarkable capacity for self-healing. But have I avoided the question well enough?
That was posed by Todd Rosenberg, who will be in March 12th, will be telling us a little bit about the New Testament. So I think you answered it.
Okay.
And I have another question. Would you,
by the way, I'm only really concerned about the Hebrew Bible. The New Testament's somebody else's problem.
Exactly. Right. Not our monkeys, not our circus. But from Evie, would you consider many of the current psychological gurus or mentors magicians?
If magician is a synonym for charlatan, some of them are.
Ah,
But some of them are very, very sincere. I just always worry about those who need your money in order to share with you their secrets. There's always somebody who's going to make some fortune out of what's called Gnosticism. Only the initiates know the truth. But it will cost you $1,000 to get into the first level, and then the next level will cost you more, and the next level will cost you more, et cetera, et cetera. When it's a money-making scheme as opposed to I want to share this joyous experience, and I do need to make a living, but I don't need to make a fortune, then I might be a little more serious in paying attention.
I think that's
for sure, the prosperity gospel gurus are horrifying examples of how you pervert religion into idolatry.
Yeah, I think that totally, completely makes sense to me. Do I have any other?
You and I are on the same page.
Yes,
Forget everybody else.
Yes. Always good, always good. Any other questions? You've given us a lot to think about this morning.
Well, I've got 2
And-
minutes. If there are no other questions, I'm going to end with one of my favorite poems, okay?
Yes, please. Oh, who's it by?
I want you to pretend you haven't heard this poem before, because some of us are very familiar with it. It's E.E. Cummings. I thank you, God, for most this amazing day. And one of the things that's fascinating is, Cummings never capitalized, except in this poem, he capitalizes God. So he's being serious. I thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees and a blue true gleam of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I who have died am alive again today. And this is the sun's birthday. This is the birthday of life and of love and wings and of the gay, great happening, illimitably earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing any, lifted from the know of all nothing, human merely being, doubt unimaginable you? Now the ears of my ears awake, and now the eyes of my eyes are open. Or to quote Heschel, who lit the fire before our eyes, and who lit the fire of our eyes? I'm deeply grateful for the chance to share a little bit of this with you. And thank you so much.
Yeah, we are so grateful to have had you with us this morning, and you're getting some good reviews in the chat. And when you come to Chicago, let me know, and we can fix up to do this in person. I just want to remind my people that next week we're in person, Lox and Bagels in person, and it's our conversion panel, and people will be sharing their stories of how they came to choose Judaism. And I think it'll be a informative and a great way to see everybody next Sunday morning. And don't forget the Purim spiel. There's always something. There's always something. Look at your Macomb at home. Yes, I'm sorry, Rabbi Zedek. Go ahead.
I didn't get any lox and bagel. What kind of stuff is this?
Listen, we had a lox and bagel. We had a lox box this morning, and if you lived in Chicago, I would have delivered it.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, it said at one point we were 36, which is the perfect number.
Oh, you're right. You're absolutely right. Okay.
Thank you all. Blessings.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.